Today's class is the continuation of sexual reproduction of plants, sexual reproduction in plants. Okay, we have already discussed about the reproductive organs in the plants like anther and stigma, style. These all things we have discussed in our last class. So today we will start with the pollination. Now, what is term pollination means? Term pollination means transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma. ठीक है, as we already know कि anther is the male reproductive part which contain pollen grains in them, okay, and stigma is the female reproductive part which needs that pollen grain for the fertilization to takes place, which takes place in ovary. Okay, so the first stage in sexual reproduction is कि pollen grain must go to the stigma, which is the female reproductive part, which is connected with the ovary, where fertilization will take place. Okay, so what is pollination? Pollination is the process by which this pollen grain is transferred from where? From anther to the stigma, where anther is the male reproductive part and stigma is the female reproductive part. Okay, now we need the transferring. Okay, we need the transferring of what? Pollen grain. So how these pollen grains are transferred? These pollen grains are transferred either by wind or by insect. Okay, now this pollen grain are transferred either by wind or by insect. Okay, depending upon whether the wind is a pollinating agent or insect is a pollinating agent, there are two types of flower. Okay, now you see, we have already discussed insect pollinated flower in our last class, but here I am comparing, I am trying to show you the comparison between insect pollinated flower and wind pollinated flower. Okay, now the flower which has a brightly colored petal, scent and nectar, these all qualities which flower have, it is only to attract the insect. Okay, so you can see here it's such a brightly colored petals are there. Now you see the petal is this is the petal of insect pollinated flower. This is the petal. Okay, now these petals are dull, they are not brightly colored because they don't need insect to get attracted towards them. But you see the petal of these flowers, they are brightly colored because they want insect to come, sit on them, and so that the insect will carry the pollen grains. Okay, insect will carry the pollen grain from anther to the stigma. Okay, now you understood. But the petals are not brightly colored because they don't want insect. Here the pollinating agent is wind. The pollen grain from here to here is carried by wind. But in this case, the pollen grain from here to here is carried by insect. So insect when sit on the anther and then when it sit on the stigma, so they will take pollen grain from here to here. That is why the petals are brightly colored, so that insect can be attracted. Okay. Now here in my table I just discussed the petal, dull and brightly colored. Rest all I discuss about the reproductive organ. Like you see, anther. Wind pollinated anthers are like this. You see, they are hanging outside the flower. They are hanging outside the flower so that the pollen grain present here is the pollen grain, can easily carried by wind. They are not inside the flower. They are not inside the flower. They are outside the flower. They are hanging outside the flower so that wind can easily carry these pollen grain from here to here. But you can see the anther in the insect pollinated flower, they are present inside the flower because they want insect to come and sit on the anther. Okay, so they are not hanging out. Large hanging outside the flower. The anthers of wind pollinated flower are large hanging outside the flower. I already explained you why they are hanging outside the flower, because so that they can easily come in contact with the wind. Okay, now coming to the stigma. Stigma, again you see, in wind pollinated flower, stigma are large, feathery and exposed outside to the flower. Again, it is large. You see, these are the stigma. They are large and feathery. Feathery, why? Because they can easily catch the pollen grain which is present in the wind. they can easily catch the pollen grain which is present in the wind. So that is why they are large, and they are also exposed so that they come in contact with the wind easily. Whereas you see the the stigma of insect pollinated flower, they are sticky and they are present inside the flower. This is the stigma. Just I showed outside in order to show the labeling correct, but they are also present inside the flower. You can see the hibiscus flower is a very good example. You can easily distinguish in the hibiscus flower what is anther and what is stigma. Hibiscus is an insect pollinated flower. Why I am saying? Because you know they are brightly colored, है ना? So which type of stigma they have? The sticky and inside the flower. Now, next important point which you need to know in these two categories of flower is which type of pollen grains they have. Wind pollinated flower, the pollen grains are very small, they are very light, smooth, and produce in a large number. Very large quantity of pollen grains are formed in wind pollinated flower, okay, and they are very light, small and smooth, so that they can easily carried by the wind. Whereas in case of insect pollinated flower, the pollen grains compared to wind pollinated flower are large, sticky and fewer in number, okay. But you understand that this is a comparison, it is a comparison, okay. In compared to wind pollinated flower, they are large in size, they are sticky. Why they are sticky? So they can easily stick to the body of the insect and carry to the stigma, and the number comparatively compared to wind pollinated flower, the number is also fewer. So I hope pollination is clear.